Thank you all so much. I am also incredibly honored to be here, incredibly honored to share a stage with Napoleon, that was an incredibly inspiring presentation. So thank you for dedicating a chunk of your Saturday to this. I will try not to depress us too much. I'm gonna talk about some issues that we work on having to do with water quality, but I also wanna talk about the ways that we see hope in this struggle and the ways that we're doing proactive work to try and address these issues. So stick with me if it's getting depressing. So first, what is a river keeper? I really appreciate that introduction. I think that covered it well. People ask me all the time, they're like, what are you keeping out there? And you know, I like to say, keeping the river clean, keeping the river healthy, keeping the river in your hearts. But our job is kind of a lot of different things. I came to this out of being an educator, like Sarah shared. I was a high school and university instructor. And so a big part of my job is education, but also a big part is political advocacy. I spend a lot of time working with and around city and statewide officials who are responsible for nominally at least protecting our environment. And then we are also scientists, so we actually go out and we do water quality sampling, and we have a lab in our 3 offices, and we process data and try and understand where pollution issues are coming from. And a big part of that is we are a hotline, so people call in concerns having to do with anything really related to the river, and we'll go investigate things. And so we will often go out in places where people are calling in reports. Sometimes we'll get into little tiny planes and fly above the watershed and see what's going on from the sky. And we'll go meet with community members, and that is actually how I got connected with a lot of awesome people. Krista and others is just through our community advocacy and getting to know people who are doing good work and who are impacted by our work. So, as the Neuse Riverkeeper, it would be a shame for me not to wax poetic about our river for a moment. This is the Neuse River watershed. Essentially, this shape, the darker color, is the upper watershed. The lower watershed is the lighter green. It starts, the watershed itself, the tippy top person in Orange County, and makes its way. The river is 275 miles from Falls Lake all the way down to New Bern, where it empties into the Pamlico Sound. So it is actually the longest river contained fully in North Carolina. It's the longest undammed river. They took out the last dam in 2017, woohoo. The Neuse is much better off for that. It also has the widest mouth of any river in the country. So in Oriental, it's 6 miles across. It looks like an ocean there. It's estuarian. And here in Durham, I apologize, this is a terrible photo. Bring the microphone, aren't I? I just wanted to illustrate that Durham, if you can see that red line splitting across the city, that is the split of watersheds. So Durham is part Haw watershed, part Neuse watershed, and that split is not far from here, actually. So I work in conjunction with the Haw Riverkeeper, who, if you don't know her, she's amazing, Emily Sutton, check her out. And we work together on all the issues that I'm gonna cover, but I also work all the way down to New Bern. So I spend about a quarter of my time in New Bern and Oriental, and time in between in Goldsboro and Kinston, and I live in Raleigh, and lately I've been spending almost half of my time in Durham, and I'll talk about why. So I was lucky enough last year to get to paddle 150 miles of the Neuse River, and it took 11 days because we did it really slow, and we learned all about the river on the way and took notes and reported pollution concerns. And so I wanted to give you a quick tour de Neuse of just what it looks like along the way. This river is really dynamic. There's a lot of different faces. It changes significantly. My work in the upper watershed is so different than my work in the lower watershed. There's different water quality issues. So just a quick tour de Neuse to orient you. This is the Neuse River at Falls Lake, the headwaters. So actually, the Neuse is formed when the Flat and the Eno River meet, and then they become the Neuse. And then it flows directly into Falls Lake, which is the drinking water supply for Raleigh and others in Wake County. And then it continues eastward to, here's Raleigh. This is where the old dam used to be, the old Milburnie Dam, now removed. Now it's Falls of the Neuse. It is the only white water on the whole Neuse River. One of my friends recently toppled over his kayak here, and I made fun of him relentlessly because there is no white water on the Neuse except right here. So watch out. And then the river gets a little more lazy. This is Cliffs of the Neuse State Park. If you haven't checked it out, highly recommend. Pretty amazing geological feature. You can see the different sediment and soil stratification showing you like a geological history of this area. The water here is wider and it's slower. This is near the town of Seven Springs, near the town of Goldsboro. And then you get to Kinston, and it is swampy. All of a sudden, you are seeing cypress trees everywhere, and you're worried about alligators. The river is very, very slow. Sometimes it feels like you're paddling upstream when you're going downstream if the wind is blowing in your face. And then you get to New Bern, and it looks almost, it looks like oceanic. This is where it becomes estuarian, saltwater habitat. You start to see saltwater marsh and bigger water. And the Croatan National Forest, another place highly recommend, along the Neuse River. This is a Pocosin, which is a really beautiful, also endangered kind of wetland area. It's a swamp on a hill, actually, and it functions like a sponge. And there, as you can imagine, very wetland, very swampy. And my last photo is of Oriental. This is where the river is 6 miles wide across. So it is, as you can see, feels oceanic, but it is actually, the Pamlico Sound is the largest lagoonal estuary in the country. So it is protected on the outer side by the Outer Banks, and it's the second most important fishery in our country. So hugely important for, not only aquatic species, but for all of us who rely on the fishing population and people who rely on fishing for their jobs. It's a hugely important place. Also, the Neuse has a troubled history, speaking of fish. This is long before my time. I was alive, but not aware of the Neuse at this point. But in the mid to late 90s, the Neuse River actually was on America's list of most endangered rivers because it was seeing significant fish die-offs. I'm talking millions of fish of all kinds, diversities dying off, and that was a result of a lot of pollution going into the river. Wastewater treatment plants were dumping, there were dye factories, textile mills dumping, and there was little to no regulation of these discharges, and that was causing algal blooms, nutrient overloads, and when algae blooms, it eventually dies, and when it dies, it sucks up the oxygen in the water, and then the fish die. And so hugely major catastrophes were happening on the Neuse in the 90s. But thankfully, a lot of folks decided to invest in the Neuse River. And so since that time, there have been so many different good works that I could spend forever talking about, but basically community and government entities banded together and invested in the Neuse. And last year, the Neuse actually got River of the Year award, which is a recognition of how far we've come, but it wasn't saying we've solved the problems. We have not solved the river's problems. It's a recognition of how far we've come and how far we have to go still. So I want to talk about the how far we have to go still. Ongoing issues. This is the most visible one. I would be remiss not to acknowledge all of the litter here in Durham. Ellerby Creek is famous for having urban litter issues in all of our urban streams. This is our hugely visible issue and something that we work on all the time. We also study microplastics, which are, when these things dissolve into the tinier and tinier pieces that never go away and are pervasive. So we study macro and microplastics. Sedimentation here in Durham, I'm going to get more into this issue at the end of my presentation, but it's a major issue. Sediment runoff from land clearing developments, converting forested land and green space into large clear cuts, blasting, mass grading, dumping tons of sediment into our creeks. These were both taken right here in Durham. Bacteria is another thing that we track. We do a lot of sampling for E. coli and enterococci, another thing that just runs off of our streets and sidewalks and ends up in our waterways, sometimes through bad infrastructure, which is the top left picture. And the bottom right is how we sample, and we look at it under a black light, and we can see the bacteria. So that is an example of a really polluted waterway filled with bacteria because all the cells are lighting up. I mentioned the algal blooms and fish kills. We aren't in the 90s anymore, but these happen. These happen. This summer was a really bad year for fish kills. We had hundreds of thousands of dead menhaden coming up in New Bern, and so I spent a chunk of my summer down there sampling for algal blooms and documenting the fish kills. Loss of wetlands and green space. This is continuing to happen. If folks here were tracking the Sackett Supreme Court decision, that had serious impacts for wetlands. Essentially, recently, the state of North Carolina decided to side with the Sackett decision, which took away 50% of wetland protection in this country. So we are looking at open season for dredging, filling on a lot of our significant wetlands, including places like Pecosins that I mentioned earlier, which are isolated wetlands, swamps on a hill. And climate. So this is the background, the driver for everything that I'm talking about. All the issues that I just mentioned, including litter, are climate-related issues. When it rains, when we have more water quantity coming down, issues like erosion, sedimentation, litter coming off, bacteria coming off, all of that is amplified. Also flooding. The Neuse River, not up here, but further down as you get to Kinston, is extremely flood prone. And I've worked with communities who've literally been displaced. Their homes were flooded completely, and then FEMA came in and said, here's some money, but you have to leave. Entire communities were destroyed in the Neuse River watershed because of climate impacts. And that is ongoing. And an important thing to note about that is that this is an environmental justice issue, not just an environmental issue. Who are the communities that end up in the floodplain? These are poor, marginalized communities of color, and they are the ones that are getting the brunt of the effects of climate change. This picture on the bottom right is actually a home that is in Kinston, which is one of the areas that an entire community, once known as Lincoln City, was flooded, bought out, and removed. And so it's a very real and ongoing issue. And the other side of that is, the bust side of climate change is the lack of water and the drought periods. And so we're seeing, with sea level rise and then drought periods, we're seeing the salt wedge kind of moving further and further upstream. And what that's doing is it's pushing freshwater habitat out, creating more marsh. So the swamps are being threatened by the marshes. The land is being turned into water, and we have ghost forests and big die-offs. So these are also in the Neuse River and the lower Neuse. Okay, that was the depressing part. You can shake that off. I have to every day. What can we do? So I want to highlight some of the good watershed works that we do, or as my bubby would call them, good watershed mitzvahs. We spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of time doing reactive work. I feel like whacking a mole sometimes. I'm like, always responding to pollution issues, and it feels sometimes like we're just Sisyphus rolling the stone up the hill. But we try to balance those with good proactive projects, little watershed mitzvahs, and so we do a lot of cleanups in partnership with community. We work hand in hand with schools and universities to install green stormwater infrastructure like cisterns, like rain gardens, like bioswales, so that it can soak up stormwater so it doesn't run off and destroy our creeks. We put in these amazing trash traps in partnership with the water keepers all over North Carolina, and they passively collect trash that floats down our creeks. Then we work with the community to clean them out. So you actually have one here in Durham, thanks to the Neuse Riverkeeper. We've got one in Raleigh, we also have one in Kinston, we've got one in New Bern, we've got one in Washington, and we're expanding the program. So that's one fun way that we try and work with community to address these issues. We also are big on water quality transparency. People love our waterways, and people are always asking me, how's the Neuse doing? And you know what? I'm not gonna lie, it's struggling. And there are some places that I would say, don't swim. And there are some places that I would say, you should swim, it's great. And it's important to me that everyone knows where those places are. So we run a program called Swim Guide. During the summer swim months, we sample all across the Neuse and Pamlico. We've got over 50 sites that we do in conjunction with volunteers who help us sample. We train them, they grab water samples, and then every single week we tell you where it's good to swim and where it's not good to swim. And you can do that for free. You can sign up for those notifications for free. And that's a service that we are committed to providing to the community. We also, like I said, we're a hotline, so we're big on investigations. We get up into tiny planes, we go into the creeks. I spend about half of my time in the field, kind of like chasing around issues, and then the other half of the time trying to get the people who actually have power to do things about them to address them. And building community, the folks on the bottom left are actually the folks I was mentioning from Lincoln City in Kinston. And they're trying to reclaim this historical jazz community that was flooded and bought out. And they're awesome. These people are like building gardens in the FEMA buyout lands, and they're like really working to revitalize a thing that was lost because of climate. And this is the same community on the bottom right. We put a trash trap in their flood-prone creek, and now we're working with them to clean it out. And the top one is in Raleigh, in a Little Rock Creek, which is another environmental justice community in the heart of Southeast Raleigh. So now I'm at the Durham part. This is my special pitch to all of us who live and work and are around the Durham area. This is why I spend so much time here in this city. For over a year now, I have been documenting the sediment pollution that has been coming from significant corporate-driven land use changes. Now, these come in the form of rezonings. They're happening all the time, where rural, mostly forested areas are being put before city council, and city council decides whether to turn them into subdivisions, like the one on the bottom right. This is one of the largest subdivisions that came up when I was working. And unfortunately, because Durham, a huge part of it, is located within the Triassic Basin, which is a special geological area that has specifically sensitive soil. In fact, it's so sensitive that it's the most highly erosive soil, the most fine particulate soil, that when it's kicked off in rain events, it doesn't settle very well in the stream. It just kind of dirties the stream. And so the compounding issues of having that sensitive soil series, and then also the huge boom of development that everyone, I'm sure, in Durham is familiar with, there's a perfect storm of issues happening in the creeks. In fact, in the 6,235 square mile Neuse watershed that I work in, this is the most polluted place in terms of sediment pollution that I have seen. The picture on the right is a creek in Durham, Lick Creek. I've highlighted the Lick Creek watershed, which is part of Durham. That's where I've been spending a lot of my time. That area has been targeted significantly with land clearing developments. And that photo on the right is a photo of Lick Creek, which runs a biblical color of red every time it rains. And this is sediment running off of developments, and this is ongoing. I've been out there every other week for a year documenting this. And we not only document the turbidity in Lick Creek, so this is a tributary, Martin Branch, meeting Lick Creek and making it dirtier. And on the right, I've got my water sample. I just want to show you the comparison here. So turbidity levels of Lick Creek are the red on the right-hand side. Rocky Branch is my reference site. It does not run through developments, but it's just down the road. It's right next to it. It always, so the state standard for surface water, how clean it should be according to the state the Clean Water Act says 50 nephelometric turbidity units, 50 or under for surface water. So you can see where Lick Creek ends up on that again and again when it rains, and compared to Rocky Branch, which is always under the standard, which is healthy. So I show this with you not to get bogged down in the numbers, but to say that one of the things that I keep hearing from people who want to say, there's nothing wrong here, is that this is inevitable and it's natural because the Triassic Basin is just dirty. So it is not inevitable, it is not natural, it's not unavoidable. This is a water quality issue. So I've got a couple of slides and then I'll leave it, just to share why this matters. Sediment pollution isn't just bad for aquatic life, but I'll start there. It's bad for aquatic life because it literally suffocates the very building blocks of life. The top right-hand side is a picture of, we went out with a benthic macroinvertebrate sampler to look at the little tiny creatures that make the building blocks of creek life. These are all of the bugs that if you're a fisher person, then you know all about them, the caddisflies, the mayflies, the stoneflies, sensitive species that cannot live if there's sediment choking out their homes. If they're not there, the fish don't come, and there's no fish. And so what we found is that the creeks that are polluted, like Lick Creek, are suffering. There's not a diversity of species, and there are not sensitive macroinvertebrate species showing up at the same rate that they should. So that is a problem for all aquatic life in that creek. It's also a problem because that flows eventually downstream into Falls Lake. Lick Creek connects to Falls Lake. And Falls Lake is the drinking water supply for all of Raleigh and a lot of others in Wake County. We did a couple flyovers of this area, and this is a picture from the plane. You can see from Lick Creek entering to the south and entering into Falls Lake and literally filling the lake with sediment is what's happening. So my pitch for you, action opportunity. This coming Monday, the City Council will be hearing a 280-acre proposal called the Perry Farms Proposal, which is another big forested area that is proposed to be turned into 665 townhomes. And it is on either side of Lick Creek, exactly on either side of it, in a place that I've been sampling for a year and have been documenting the pictures that I showed you. And it's in a natural heritage area. So North Carolina, the state, actually keeps a map of all of our high-value conservation areas. This place has endangered plant species, it has endangered and sensitive plant communities, hardwood forest communities, and this is where they want to put a townhome. So my pitch is, if you can spare a Monday night, come out. We are trying to get people to come out and give a comment and say something about this. It doesn't have to be extremely fancy. We have a lot of information on our website. That's a flyer that we created on the left. But on our website, we're running tons of info on it right now, including talking points, which you're welcome to use. But please, if you can, come out and say, this is a bad idea. This is not what responsible development looks like in Durham. And that is all I have. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for all that everyone in this room is doing every day to address these issues in climate change.